Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life. In this episode, I'm joined by Helen Tarokh, a former head teacher and now a leadership coach. We talk about the challenges of having a family when you're a female, looking to explore leadership in education. And we chat about the challenges of headship and the energy that is needed for this sort of role. We talk about getting a diverse range of experiences and how important that is when you want to take on leadership. And we talk about coaching and the impact that this can have on leaders. So I hope you really love this episode. Let's get going. Helen, it's so fantastic to have you. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me to
Lovely
talk through your educational journey. And we're going to talk about leadership. And I think we're going to talk about some of the things that can really help leaders who are in schools at the moment. So it'd be really fab to just hear who you are and where are you at the moment.
Okay, I'm Helen Tarokh, and I'm here up in sunny Darlington in the northeast, not so sunny. But yeah, I'm a leadership coach, currently working mostly with head teachers, but also some trust leaders as well, and loving my role as a leadership coach. But I was previously a head teacher myself.
Amazing. Well done. We'll get into that. We'll get into all the logistics of headship and all of the learnings. So
Yeah.
because I'm nosy, I love finding out about people's own kind of school experience and just what their own, version of that was. I think it's probably, there's not many jobs that you have experienced being in the system of before you then go into it. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about your, what your school experience was like for you.
Yeah. Well, it's a long way back for me. I'm going right the way back to the 1970s. But yeah, I mean, there was a few contrasts in my education. I went from a primary school in a small market town, I suppose you could call it, up here in the northeast. And I moved to a convent school for girls at age 8, and I was so lucky to go there. I feel really blessed, really grateful for that. It was a wonderful school, very small school, out in the countryside, and I just remember a lot of warmth there, a lot of safety, a lovely safe place to learn, and I really did get a love of learning from that place. But you used to walk in the door and you just kind of felt the safety and the warmth and the family atmosphere sort of hit you as you went in. So I feel very blessed with the education that I had, which was fabulous.
And did that go into secondary as well?
Yeah. So it went through to 16. But as I say, it was really, really unique kind of school because it was the Sisters of Mercy, and I know that not everybody has great, stories to tell about the Sisters of Mercy, but my experience was lovely, and it was just a really small place. It doesn't exist anymore, that kind of thing. Just it doesn't fit in today's world, I don't think. But yeah, made friends for life there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so great. Love it when people have a really fab experience. And you're right, when you said a Catholic school, I thought, oh, I wonder what you're going to say next. So I've heard lots of people say, oh, it's really strict and really tough
Yeah.
time. So that's
Yeah.
so fantastic that you enjoyed it. And I think you can't underestimate the simplicity. It sounds simple, but it's not, of having somewhere safe and warm and
Yeah.
welcoming that you feel belonging. So when did you know you wanted to get into teaching? Was it from
Yeah.
then or
Well, it's
later on?
interesting because I think some ways I was always meant to be a teacher. I did that sort of typical thing that people talk about of like lining all your teddy bears up and teaching the teddy bears when you got home from school. I did all that. And I think I just always loved the idea of teaching. But I did have an interesting path through university. I studied history, and basically I had a baby 3 months before my final exams. Yes, so it kind of threw everything up into a bit of confusion. Um, Loved history. I mean, I was passionate about history, and to be honest, if that hadn't happened, I could have seen myself being some kind of academic researcher or something like that. But that wasn't to be. So I did all right, passed me, got me degree and everything. But I was a young mum for the first couple of years after me graduation. And then I sort of thought, actually, yeah, I'll go into education. But my first step was actually as a school librarian. So I got a job in the local comprehensive school as a school librarian and absolutely loved that. It was fab. And I enjoyed it. All the girls used to come in and gossip to me at lunch times and tell me all their romantic stories, and it was a hoot. But then after about a year of doing that, I started my PGCE and started my journey in education, which was fab.
Amazing. And so, yeah, tell me about your kind of steps into teaching and then when, I guess, what the shift into leadership was.
Yeah, so for me there was a lot of special needs in my early teaching career. So I started out as a Senko, and this was when Senkoing first started. So, now it's sort of like quite everybody recognizes what a massive job it is, but at the time it wasn't really seen like that. It was like, oh, you're an NQT, you can be the Senko because this is a new thing. So, you can go and find out about it. So I started off with special needs really, and that was great. I loved it. So I started studying towards a master's degree, and um, I was a Senko, and then I went to work in a special school. So I spent 3 years working in a special school, and then I did a bit of supply teaching, and then I became an advisory teacher for special needs. So that was really, really interesting. I loved doing that job. And then it was from there that I sort of thought, right, where do I go from here? Because, sometimes with special needs, you back yourself into a bit of a corner and you end up just sort of doing special needs forever. But I just felt that I'd been really privileged. I'd seen so much fantastic mainstream practice that I just really wanted to do it all. I wanted to teach again and put it all into practice and really, in a difficult circumstance. I was in Leicester by this stage, and there was a lot of schools on my patch that were really challenging. So I just wanted to get my teeth into it, really. So I went back into a primary school as assistant head and Senko. And that was sort of the first step on my leadership journey, really. Then I went deputy head and head. So, but I really got a lot out of all those years of special needs and getting to know my way around, difficulties, lots of different kinds of specific learning difficulties and things like that was really valuable.
Yeah, and I guess having that, I mean, it sounds a bit like you're a leader as an NQT then, because if you're taking on the Senko role in that, like straight into SLT, realms, especially as it would be now, isn't it? So yeah, had to have that foundation of solid understanding of practice, must have been really helpful, yeah, in those next stepping stones. So
Yeah.
what was your experience of leadership like in some of those roles? So kind of that deputy role and others. How did it feel? What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, well, being an assistant head and Senko in a very, very challenging school was very difficult. It was kind of a baptism of fire, but then I would say I had a couple of those.
Haven't we all?
How many times can you be baptized in fire?
I don't know. What would the
Oh,
what would the Mothers of Mercy say?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, that was tough. It was a tough gig that was, and yeah, the people say that have you seen what you want to be as a leader, or have you seen what you don't want to be as a leader? I definitely experienced that, and sort of looking at it and thinking, this is not right. This is not how it should be. It can be done better than this. And so I always had a sense of that. But challenges, make you stronger, don't they? And so, I wouldn't have been without that time, because I made some amazing friends, as you do in these circumstances, don't you? And I learned an awful lot about leadership, about life, about myself, going through those challenges. It set me up well for headship, I'd say. Yeah.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
I've said that to myself a lot
Yeah. Yeah.
over the years, and then gone, I really hope it doesn't kill me. Let's keep going and hope it's all going to be fine. So tell me a bit about your headships then. So from deputy, you stepped into headship. Was that at the school you were deputy, or did you kind of apply for that,
No,
took
no,
that lead?
I was in different schools, from
Yeah.
assistant head. Then I went to be a deputy. I went to be a deputy in an infant school, which was a great thing, because I'd been sort of a Key Stage 2 teacher pretty much all the way through. So I really felt like I didn't have enough understanding of early years and Key Stage 1. So I went to be a deputy head in an infant school. And that was fantastic. It was great learning for me, great development for me. So I went from there into a through primary again. Again, very tough. That was my second baptism. That was a tough school. It was a tough gig. But again, amazing group of people. We made it in the end, but it was quite it was a challenge. It was a real challenge. I was there for 5 years. And the school had never had an Ofsted good judgment in its history. And we did get to one.
Yay, well
But
done.
it was it was a journey. It was a real journey. Yeah, and I learned so much about leadership in that role. So much about building a team, about, again, about myself, and, what I was good at, what I wasn't so good at, what I needed to, develop myself with. There was all that. Yeah.
And then was your second headship another baptism or a different sort of journey?
It was a different kind of challenge. So I came back up to the northeast. Me and my family had been down in the Midlands for about 20 years, and I just had this, strong pull back to my roots. So we came up here, and I deliberately went to a bigger school. And yeah, it was a different kind of challenge. I think it's really interesting, the difference between small school and big school, because my first headship was a single form entry, and then I went to a large primary as a head. But that difference between how hands-on you can be as a head in a small school versus a big school, I think it's really an interesting dynamic. It's something that often comes up in coaching conversations as well. It's like, how can I be a head in this massive school with all these staff? And I really lived through that, and sort of had to really get to grips with delegation, had to really get to grips with, working through a team. And it was good. It was good for my leadership, I would say.
I've chatted to quite a lot of people about that recognition, and you've talked really, really clearly about those kind of strategic steps, almost, whether they were strategic at the time or not, about giving yourself those different experiences, so that you've got that really broad, like, knowledge base, I guess, and experience beneath you, which is amazing. And again, I've spoken to lots of people more recently about this idea of that small school, big school, and how much leadership experience, maybe, I mean, heads, you just have to do it all, don't you? But certainly for kind of middle leaders, or they're teachers in a small school, but they're having to take on so much because there's no one else to do it sometimes. So actually, I think I sometimes feel that small schools can get a bit discounted in this idea that, if you've been at a small school, maybe you haven't seen so much and you haven't done so much because you haven't as many people to work with. But actually, people are taking on huge responsibilities, similar to being a Senko in your NQT year, because
there's no one else to do it. I mean, that was really similar to my experience running a small 3 or 4 class school, team of 5 teachers, me and 4 people. We'd make decisions over lunch. 2 days later, they were pretty well embedded. We'd be cracking on with it because, the communication can be a lot more,
Yeah.
casual. You can do
Yeah.
things really quite quickly. And then absolutely that step into a big school, we really have to carefully think about and reflect on, well, hang on, how am I going to scale this up to work? Because you just can't have lunch with 50 staff. It's not how it works. Amazing. So what happened next then? So we're in that school, loads of learning from kind of small to big. And were you there for 5 years
Yeah, I was there for
again?
5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you're not doing that now. So what was that
No,
shift
no,
like? How did you make that decision?
no. Well, it was interesting because, yeah, I was one of those head teachers that kind of put it all in. I was an all or nothing type of girl, really, when it came to headship. And unfortunately, it all kind of caught up with me because I had illness about 4 years in. So I had a thyroid cancer, which was really, really tough. And I got through it and I went back to work after. And then about a year after that, I kind of went, I can't do this anymore. It was the energy levels. It just took a chunk out of me that I couldn't get back. I just couldn't get back to the energy level that I felt I needed in order to do that job well. And, now looking back on it, I wonder if I could have learned to do the job in a different way, but for me and who I am, I just, it just didn't work out. And I ended up saying, it's funny because I've just written a blog about leaving headship and Jurgen Klopp leaving Liverpool. Some of the things that he said, it was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I felt like.
Yeah.
He talked about running out of energy, and that was exactly right. And he also talked about this club needs a different leader now. And those are the exact words that I use with my staff. I said, this school needs somebody different right now who's got that energy to put in and take it to the next level. And I just didn't have it. And I just had to sort of accept that and move on. But once I'd kind of made that realization, I was looking forward to the next thing, which was for me was coaching. So yeah, it was
Really.
a happy story, really.
Was there it really resonates, just those feelings and that's absolutely, I can resonate with those very closely around that feeling that actually the energy levels. I didn't go through that sounds incredibly tricky for you, but it's hard because it can just be an all or nothing job. And I think education itself, whatever level you are working in, people do throw themselves into it. It's such a personal job. You put your heart on the line, day in, day out. You go to work and you give your all, and you often go home and then you give your all, and it's just all consuming, isn't it? And when you said your reflection on whether you could have done it differently, I remember feeling a real sadness that I was in that bit unable to do it differently.
Yes.
Because every time I speak to a head teacher, I go, oh, especially one who's loving it and thriving, I go, oh yeah, I really want to do it again.
Yeah.
But not yet. Because it takes so much. I don't know if even heads maybe recognize enough how much energy it takes, and that actually you can have that balance, I suppose. So before we get on to sort of the bit that you're doing now more, in those times of leadership, what inspired you? And it might be who, or could be books, stories, podcasts, I don't know. What were the things that kind of kept you going and inspired and motivated you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, other heads. I was always blessed with really kind people in my sort of peer group who, were going above and beyond to look out for each other. You know, I remember when I first became a head in Leicester, and it was at the time when schools were first kind of being forced into academies, you know, and my school was on the hit list, along with, I think, there were 7 of us all together in Leicester. And one of the other heads in that group of schools set up sort of like a help group, you know, a sort of a group that we could all kind of go to and share our thoughts and share our experiences and pool our knowledge of what was really going on and how we could work through the situation. It was amazing. And I didn't have a deputy at the time. I was sort of like, I was struggling for capacity. He actually lent me his deputy for like a day a week for like half a term or something. He said, you know, just have a bit of extra support, never charged me anything, you know. It was that kind of kindness that came from other head teachers, which was really, that didn't inspire me, definitely. But I'd say the other thing that did inspire me also was the coaches that I had as a leader were amazing. I was so blessed to have a couple actually of leadership coaches over my time as a head who were amazing. And the way that they held space for me just made such a huge difference to me doing that job, and helped me to kind of step back and just see it all and kind of go, that's really what's happening. Okay. It's not what I thought it was at all. It's something quite different. And sometimes I talk about this now, about this idea of seeing the wood for the trees, is you don't always see the wood for the trees when you're in there, and coaching sort of helps you to sort of see that. But I was really lucky to have a couple of people, and that really did inspire me, and gave me this sort of notion of possibly being a coach myself.
And was that something you sought out, or was that something, because you know, my knowledge of coaching experience, my own personal experience, is probably in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. We're definitely seeing more popularity, more recognition of coaching for leaders in schools and the value of it. But yeah, so that was something you kind of looked for, or was that something suggested to you?
Yeah, it was actually, I was part of a trust in my second headship, and the CEO was a real advocate of coaching, and he secured that coaching for us as head teachers. And I was, really lucky to have been given that. It was fab. Actually, though, I was involved in coaching a couple of years before that, when coaching was just sort of starting to come more into education. And we had a project between Leicester and Oxford where heads from Leicester met up with heads from Oxford and sort of did some coaching work together, action learning sets and that sort of thing. And I'd loved doing that as well. I really had enjoyed doing that. It was fab. So yeah, I've had a few lucky experiences. The other one was me NPQEL. So when I did NPQEL, we had coaching as part of that as well. And once again, an amazing coach and really helpful.
And so that was the journey you took then. So tell us a bit about how that worked, from stepping out of headship and getting into what you do now, which is you have your own business called, is it called Mrs. T?
Mrs. T
Coaching?
Yeah, that's right. So I thought I was being really original at the time, and now everyone that you look at, a Mr. T or a Mrs. T or Mrs.
Is there a bit of a nod to the A team or not?
Oh well, never mind. It was a good idea at the time. But yeah, so I set up this business as I left my head teacher role. I spent the first 3 months just doing the course. So I really wanted to make sure that I'd properly built my skills up. So I did my ILM level 7 course. And then after a few months, I set up the business. And I didn't intend to just work with school leaders. I was really keen to work with leaders in other sectors, because really it's harder, and you might sort of have a sense of this. It's harder to coach people when you do know what they're going through, actually, it's more challenging for me as a coach. Like when I've coached quite a few charity sector leaders, and I loved that. And I really felt like I was doing really good coaching because I was able to be a really pure coach, just listening, helping them find their solutions, drawing on their resourcefulness. But when I'm coaching head teachers, I've constantly got voices in my head going, I've been there, I know what this is like, So you've got to sort of all the time, it's like the challenge for me is to quiet those voices, to say, stay calm. This is about this person. Don't make assumptions. You don't know what their situation is, and to try and help them to find their way through it. So I would say it wasn't the easiest path, sort of moving towards coaching head teachers, but it has been very rewarding to do that, and I do love it.
And I imagine for heads that are looking for support, actually, absolutely felt this way. Having somebody who has been there, who does understand what they're going through to an extent. Of course, everyone's experience is different, but also understands all the acronyms and all of the pressures that we have, because I think that's really hard, isn't it? And even if it's not mentoring, but knowing that person sitting on the other side there does get it, that must be really valuable to the people that you work with.
Yes, I think that people are telling me that that's why they've chosen me, that's why they like working with me, is because I know the territory and because I can empathize. And that's what I think the benefit of it is that I've got that empathy. But what I say to people all the time is, it's about you, and I'm not going to be bringing advice and suggestions unless you specifically ask me for that. When we can sort of talk about that a bit more if you want it, but really I'm not here for that. I'm here to listen to you and empathize with you and help you find your way forward.
Yeah, and that holding space,
Yeah.
having experienced coaching myself, you almost can't understand the value of it until you've experienced it, and once you've been in there and you've just, because that's what I've found always in my headships, making that time, just putting it in the diary to have that time to reflect and to be and to think. And you might write it in your diary, but you're probably not going to do it by yourself. You need that experienced person alongside you to support and to actually make that time to do that work. So obviously all of your work is confidential, but it would be really interesting to hear a bit about what the kind of challenges that you're seeing in kind of the work you're doing and the links to what you were doing in headship. Just kind of, get a sense of the things that you're recognizing as, we know there's some really big ones out there, but what's coming up at the moment?
Really, I'm getting a real sense that there's a lot of heads who are considering their options. And I've had people talking to me about kind of like they're approaching burnout, but I'm using that word with caution because but people are saying to me that they feel differently about the job than they used to, that it's draining them, that the challenges seem hard to overcome. And I just think a lot of people are tired of it and are looking at other options. And I've really taken that on board in my work. And from working with people are telling me that after coaching, they're feeling like it's a bit more doable, it's more manageable. I think one of my clients said at some point, the ups and downs are a bit less kind of, it's a little bit easier. It's not
Less
quite so
drastic.
marked. Yes. He had a lovely way of putting it, but I can't remember the words now, but it was along those lines. But yeah, I think that's really at the core of my work, is trying to support heads to, if they want to continue, I'm not trying to suggest that people should continue if they've come to the end. And I think once you come to the end, you should be able to just go and not feel guilty about it. Because I think, you know, a lot of us in education, we have those guilt feelings that, oh, you know, I'm here for the children, I need to keep going. If you're not able to do it anymore, you should be able to walk out the door with your head held high. And we should all be saying thank you to those people for the service that you've put in and all the hard work that you've done. And, you know, you deserve every minute of freedom and peace that you get from now on. Totally. But also, I know, as you do as well, that it's not easy leaving the job before retirement, which I did. I'm not ready to retire yet. I can't take my pension yet. So financially, it's very, very difficult, and there's a lot of pressures around that too. So I just think that if people would like to stay in the role, then the kind of work that I'm doing as a coach might help them to find a better path. And it's like what we were saying earlier, is there a different way of doing it? I think that there is, actually. And my experience as a coach is telling me that there is. You can sort of lose some of the stories that you've been telling yourself that are making you stay at work longer in the evening than maybe you should or need to. So I think in terms of workload management, in terms of emotional agility, that's something I talk a lot about in my online materials that I put out. I think if people can look after their own emotions more effectively, they've got a chance of being able to continue doing a job that they love into the longer term.
Yeah, and that's I get incredibly sad when I hear other heads, and there are so many you hear at the moment who are, you're right, considering their options, unsure, using phrasings like this is the hardest it's ever been, you know, the most challenging. And it's just heartbreaking, because I don't want anyone to be in the situation that I found myself in. I wanted to find a way to balance it. And it's a really scary thought that, you know, the amount of people I might have seen a handful of people on LinkedIn, but the reality is there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are making those decisions. And I think you're right, anything that can be done to support those individuals, if they are able to shift the way that we're working, because it's clearly not healthy for many, many, many of us. I'd love to know a bit more about emotional agility. What is that? Talk to me, give me a bit of insight.
It's not my creation. It's actually there's a writer called Susan David, who's actually a Harvard professor, and she's written a book called Emotional Agility. So her little phrase is kind of a development from the idea of emotional intelligence, which we're all kind of familiar with. But I really like the term emotional agility, because emotional intelligence is like, I know about emotions. Emotional agility is about what I do with them. So it's sort of taking it a step further, really. And when you're being emotionally agile, you can make space for your own emotions and those of other people. And you can let those emotions move through. Whereas I think a lot of the time we get stuck, don't we? We get stuck in a loop, you know, the overthinking starts to happen, and we can get really reactive. Whereas if you're emotionally agile, you'll be able to notice what's happening, be kind to yourself, let it move through, so that you're responding rather than reacting to things. It's not easy.
No, but it sounds like such a valuable way of looking at, and any way of reflecting on what is happening for you, as you said, taking that step back and exploring it. That's such valid time that we must make time for it. We must make sure that leaders and as many staff as possible, I would say, in schools have access to some form of reflective practice, because I think it, apart from the fact that we all need more money in the system, we need better
Totally,
SEND support,
totally.
and we need,
Yeah.
you know, the accountability system, crikey, we need to sort that out, and curriculum. Apart from all that, the foundational support that we can put in place to manage these challenges aren't going to go away, but if we can build a better level of foundational support for our staff in schools, then that's got to be the right way of taking it, hasn't it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your kind of visions for the future, and the things that you're working on to, you know, move forward and do this change? I think you've been coaching for about 3 years now, have you? So what are the next steps and the things that, you know, you're working on it and planning?
Yeah, I mean, I'm already working on emotional agility as a sort of like an online resource. So I've created an online resource called Being a Coaching Leader, which is about sort of helping leaders develop skills to bring coaching into leadership. So I've got a lovely little group who we meet monthly, and they're working through those resources, and we talk about that in the group coaching. So I love doing that. But yeah, I'd really like to do more of that kind of work in terms of emotional agility. I think that it's a really key part of well-being provision, both for leaders and for staff, that I think is maybe not getting all the attention it deserves at the moment. So that's an area for me that I'd like to develop further. But another thing that I'm also working on at the moment, I've created a workload management tool for head teachers, because it's just enormous, isn't it? It's huge, and you know, how on earth do you get your head around it all? So I've developed a bit of a tool that'll help people get a bit more systematic about that. So that's out there at the moment, but I'm now developing the same sort of thing for school business managers, because I've spoken to a few school business managers who sort of head teachers have referred them for coaching and things, and they're just also really struggling, drowning with workload. And I really feel that we need to maybe provide a bit more for those professionals, in terms of reflection, in terms of their CPD and how they can develop their roles. So that's my next direct thing that I'm working on, is creating something as an online tool, just so that, you know, people can easily in their own time kind of go, right, I'm going to watch another little video now and do another little step.
That sounds so, yeah, that sounds so valuable, because I think that role has grown, hasn't it, in the way that trusts are growing over the last 10 or so years. That role has really developed, but I've certainly not seen lots of support for that role. So that sounds like it'll be really interesting and valuable. And when you were talking about the sort of the group work that you do, I think there's real value to be had in the one-to-one work, but also that I remember in my headship time, nothing felt more reassuring than being in a space with another person currently doing the role who was going, yeah, I feel that way too. Or, you know, they were coming up with very similar challenges that they were facing. And just that sharing and recognition of other was incredibly powerful, because it can be such a lonely role to be in. Even if you've got the best team in the world, it can still be lonely, and having those spaces to get out and meet other people. And even again, if you're in a great trust, just seeking other networks and external is also really lovely, because in the same way that you have different friendship groups that give you different things, having those different professional relationships can bring so much richness, can't it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Amazing. It's been so amazing to speak to you, Helen. Thank you so much for sharing all of the things that, you know, have inspired you over the years. Tell just quickly before we finish, tell us where we can find your work, because the workload management tool, I mean, I probably need it now. I definitely needed it as a head. So where can we find you if we want to get some of those things?
Yeah, so probably the easiest thing is my website, which is basically mrstcoaching.com. I think most things are linked there, but I've also got a link tree, Mrs. T Coaching, which takes you directly to the workload management tool and all the other stuff that I do. So I think it's just Linktree/Mrs. T Coaching.
Great. If you need, and maybe I could put the links in with the podcast when
that'd
we
be
put it
fab.
all
Yeah,
out, because I think that is needed across the country right now. Thank you so much for your time, Helen. It's been amazing to chat to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely. And as I say, you know, I've just followed, it's lovely to meet you, even though we're still in the Zoom room. But I've loved following your story as you sort of moved out of headship and into what you're doing now. And I just think you've got such a lovely, warm presence on social media. You know, I think you're a real natural, and it's lovely to be part of your podcast.
Amazing. Thank you. Hopefully I'm quite warm in person as well. I'm quite a nice person. Oh.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.